Hello, hi there. My name is Bonnie Violet. I am a queer chaplain. In case you don't know where you are at Dragon Spirituality, our summer series titled Gender Diverse. This is episode 9 of 12. As just a little, you may have noticed the title change. We originally were going to have Veronica Electronica this evening from Nashville. She had a medical emergency, so we can keep her in our prayers and thoughts, or candle lightings, or whatever it is that we do when folks are, in distress. And thankfully, we are able to have King Julez come in their place, who was originally scheduled for October the 5th. So a little bit more about me. I'm a trans, femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist, and digital chaplain. It's a little bit of a mouthful. Um, and this particular series is brought to you in collaboration with the Drag and Spirituality Summit that will be taking place October 7th, 8th, and 9th in Chicago, Illinois, in the neighborhood, the Boys Town, Lakeview neighborhood. You can register today at dragandspirituality.com. You can look for the links in the description. If you're listening to this after October the 7th, 8th, and 9th, know that we're going to do it next year too, probably in San Francisco. So either way, just check out the website and just follow it and follow us. All right, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on our guest this evening. Hey, King Julez.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you could be here this evening. We've worked with each other for quite some time, but I think this is the first time we'll actually get to dive deep with one another, so I'm excited about it.
Yeah, me too.
Awesome. And would you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience real quick?
Sure. So as Bonnie said, my name is King Julez. I use they them pronouns. I currently reside in Toronto, Ontario, which is in Canada. So most of our community for this event is in the United States at the moment. So it's fun to be the northern neighbor. I'm involved in the United Church of Canada and have been doing drag for quite a few years. So it's really fun to just kind of bring it all together.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for introducing yourself. As I often say, I'm not very good at foreplay. I like to get right into right into the meat of it all, I guess. And so, could you tell us a little bit about your experience with spirituality as a young person or a child?
Yeah, so I have been a member of the United Church of Canada for my whole life. I started going to Sunday school very regularly when I was about 7 or 8 years old, which is very soon after that I got my call to ministry, which was a very spiritual experience. But a lot of my spiritual experiences actually happened at summer camp. So I would go to a summer camp at a certain lake near where I lived every summer, and we did so many amazing things that just really opened my eyes to the ways that I can connect both to, for me, connect to God, to connect to the universe, but also connect to the earth, the world around me, the people in my community. Yeah, and that's really stuck with me since then.
Awesome. So the spirituality you as a child and your understanding hasn't really changed much.
I It has changed in that my understanding and my engagement with my spirituality has gotten much deeper, and I'm able to conceptualize and ask more questions and understand my doubts a little bit more. So when I was a child, I just thought, I had a lot of the ideas that these things that were happening were just magic, and I was, the only one seeing them, and it was surreal to me, and I didn't really understand what was going on. I just sort of went with it because I thought it was cool. And then when I got my call to ministry, it was a very Samuel-esque story. For those of you that are familiar with the biblical story of Samuel, so long story short, it's a child who wakes up many times in the night thinking that the old man that he lives with is calling him, but he's just hearing God calling him over and over again throughout the evening. So I had a moment very similar to that as a child, and then the following Sunday we read that story in Sunday school, and
Hmm.
it sort of started to make sense. And so since then, I've been engaging more and more with my faith, with spirituality. And in recent years, I've also been diving into interfaith dialogues and really hearing about how other people are engaging with their spiritualities. And it's only enriched my own, doing practices that other people do, trying them out. How do I connect? Where do I connect? What are some different ways for me to feel energy, feel spirit, feel love? Um, Yeah.
Awesome. And for folks who are listening, you're either watching us on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitch, feel free to engage with us in the comments. You can post questions. You can tell us you can tell us we look good, like whatever, those sorts of things. And so, how did drag impact, or did drag impact your spirituality? Yeah.
Yeah. So for a little while, I was doing them very separately, and my drag was really closely tied to the beginnings of my transition when I started. It was a way for me to explore femininity in a way that was different than how people viewed me before I transitioned. And
Hmm.
then I moseyed into doing king drag for a little while, and that really sort of shone a light on how masculine features just make me feel comfortable. And so I started my transition after engaging with king drag for some time, and then I've sort of morphed into this drag clown sphere, which is where I reside now.
Hmm.
And so for quite some time they were separate, but within the last 2 years, I read a book about theology as performance art, and it really just ignited something in me where it all made sense. Right, my drag is my liturgical vestment. It's an expression of myself, my interpretation of the service, the event, whatever I'm doing. How I get into drag is how I'm called to engage with that.
Hmm.
And so it's all sort of now been tied together, that I am engaging with my theology and performing that in the art of drag that I've been engaging with for
Right.
years.
Awesome. And when you said that initially you were separate, it was not in
Hmm.
the sense of like you had to say hide your drag over here from your spirituality. You're meaning
No.
that now you're like the spiritual work that you do as a spiritual provider,
Hmm.
you do that while in drag, correct?
Yeah. So I never had to hide my drag, and I'm very thankful for that. My first ever drag show that I ever performed at, my minister at the time came, and she was sitting front row with her husband with a glass of wine, and it was just a part of me and a part of what I was doing. But absolutely now, when I lead worship, when I preach, when I do events like this, it's much more authentic for me to be in drag and fully embody myself, my connection to queer history, my silliness, my folly, my joy, and bring that with me wherever I go.
Yeah, and this series is also titled Gender Diverse, which is one of the reasons why we also wanted to have you on this particular series. But you had mentioned transition and kind of
Mhm.
transition kind of led to drag a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by talking about transition? Maybe not everybody knows what that means.
For sure. So I am non-binary, and what that means for me is I align with unaligning. So I don't feel like there is a need to label it anything other than that. I feel like there's lots of feminine and masculine within me, and there's also much that's beyond that, and outside of that as well.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like some of the animals want the spotlight.
There are 4 cats in my home, and sometimes they don't get along. So,
Yep, no problem. Yeah, I definitely know how animals goes. I just was house sitting at a place that had birds, and I swear they were quiet all up until the time I, went to go live. And there's only so much you can do to like, I don't know, guard yourself from those sorts of noises. So that's the joy of live. And you're back.
the joy of having animals, they're
And
quite
no
the.
no blood was no blood was
It's all
blood was
dramatics. It
shed.
always is.
Right, right,
um,
right.
yeah.
Do you remember
So
where you were at? Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So my transition, for me, started socially, and I changed my name at first and started playing with different pronouns, and then again I started engaging with drag and exploring femininity and masculinity in different ways, and how that looked on my physical body, and the ways that I did drag to accentuate those features. I figured out what made me really uncomfortable and what made me feel euphoria in my
Mhm.
body, whether I was doing art or not. And so then I started hormone replacement therapy 3 years ago, actually this summer, which has been quite a journey, and is something that I still play with all the time. For me, being non-binary, I don't want to transition, I'm going to put this in quotations, one end to the other. That was never my goal. And I talk with my doctors a lot about that because it confuses them. So I
Hmm.
sometimes go on, I sometimes go off. I just had one of my affirming surgeries a couple of weeks ago. So there are pieces of my transition now that I'm so
Congrats.
happy about it,
Yeah.
um, that have come from my engagement with the art and learning from the community. The drag community here in Toronto is absolutely incredible. The drag kings, the drag things, the horror, the gore, um, and of course the drag queens that populate the village as well. We we all are such a community of passion, of love, of talent, and I've learned so much from the people around me.
Yeah. I also wanted to so I have been misspeaking with because your name has king in it. I kind of made the assumption that you were a drag king. Can you talk with us a little bit more about how you identify and where king came from?
Hmm. So when I first was changing my drag name, this is I think my second or third one that I've had. Um, I take a lot of pride in the fact that I I am my drag persona, and it's not a separate sort of it's not a separate piece of me. And so when I changed my name to Julian, I was trying to figure out how to incorporate that into my drag name, which is where the Julez comes from. But I also took some inspiration from, if you're familiar with the Madagascar movie series, and there's tons of spin-offs now. I really felt like my drag persona related a lot to King Julian in that movie, that the lemur
Mm.
who's just wild and fruity and all over the place. Um, it really resonated with me, and I think it's very clown energy. And so
Hmm.
I sort of pieced that into this. And in a theological sense, Julian ties me to Julian of Norwich, which is someone who I'm reading a lot of at the moment. So she was a theologian many, many, many years ago, a mystic, Christian mystic. So lots of various pieces there. And again, I started doing drag and found myself doing king drag, and I want to honor that and keep that with me. So there's a lot of pieces to it. But drag kings are magnificent artists as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and can you talk a little bit more about what it means to be a clown, a
Hmm.
drag clown?
Yeah. So for me, not every clown or not everybody that engages with the art form considers themselves a drag artist. The reason I do is, again, my roots, my origins, the way that I engage with drag, the places that I do drag. Um, for me, the clown also ties me to a lot of the history of clowns and jesters. So actually, in ancient Egypt, the clown or the jester of the community was also the religious leader. So there's this theory that has existed throughout history that humans, of course, we have a longing for something beyond ourselves, and whether that's religion, whether that's spirituality, whether that's community, we have that longing, that need. But another fundamental human need is folly, right? Is silliness, is joy. And so a lot of ancient communities and societies tended to lump those together because the spiritual leader knew how to engage with people in different ways. So I've been really taking a lot of inspiration from that. And then, of course, as we go through history, clowns and jesters are storytellers, right? They're truth tellers. They're the ones who poke fun at people in power, who bring bad news in a way that's palatable, in a way that makes it easier to handle. And I think that's a lot of what community leadership is about too.
Hmm.
Bringing news, making things make sense, being there for people, and also having a little fun, right? And I think also, as a white Christian in Canada, it's important for me to poke at the systems of power that have privileged me but have disadvantaged so many others. And that's a huge part of my ministry. And so to have that history both in the queer community and in clowns and jesters throughout history, again, sort of ties it all together for me really, um, really tightly.
Yes, yes. And uh, so, f- so a lot of folks, I think, make the assumption that drag artists only perform on like stages and say bars and clubs or lip sync to music. I know that you do a lot of things in drag. Do you want to talk about the drag that isn't necessarily done on the lip sync performance stage? There may be other stages, but just not those ones.
Yeah, of course. And even in those venues, there's different kinds of drag.
Of course.
Um, I know plenty of drag artists now that are exploring the places in their life that they can do it. I do story times with children. I've done workshops for various staff of nonprofit organizations or ministry teams within the United Church of Canada. We do, what else have I done? I do a lot of worships, a lot of
Hmm.
gatherings. So I also did my undergraduate degree in diversity and equity. And so I sometimes hold conversations and workshops about topics related to that. And I'll do those in drag as well. Again,
Hmm.
to pay homage to my whole embodied self, bringing this information, this education, this passion work um, to everything that I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely relate to a lot of that. I tend to do a lot of my drag, which is whatever I like to do. I just do it in drag or whatever. But
Yeah.
there was one thing I'd love for you to talk about. I think you have a great some things that I've seen that is kind of that immersion of your trans identity and your drag clownliness and your spirituality is that you do have a series of reels or videos that they're prayers. Do you want to talk a little bit about them?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm still filming more. I'm not stopping there, but there's a series of prayers that I'm doing that are queer positive, and that means many things. So some of the ones that I have posted right now are a prayer for your first testosterone shot or your first estrogen pill or patch. I think these pieces of trans life, of queer life, are so meaningful and so powerful for us. And I'm sure Bonnie, you can
Hmm.
attest to that. Pieces of our transition, whether they're medical or not, are so powerful to us. And a lot of our community, the trans and queer community, has so much trauma related to religion, related to their church,
Hmm.
their spiritual community. And so to have somebody, or to have, things out there that are saying these moments that are so precious to you and so intrinsic to who you are as a whole embodied human being, those are holy
Yep.
moments, and they're
Hmm.
worth being prayed for, prayed about, prayed with. And so that's a huge piece of my work that I'm doing right now, is putting together these prayers that some I've received from others, some have uh, come from my own works, some are a combination of both. So it's really lovely to work with colleagues, with friends, with classmates, to put together these kinds of resources to really affirm and encourage trans folks and queer folks to engage with maybe their past
Hmm.
in religion and their spirituality. I know a lot of people that want to go back, want to find community like that, but there's so much hurt. So
Hmm. Yeah, and I
yeah.
think it's so powerful because, I think oftentimes, transition or transitioning is oftentimes not, you're not allowed to be spiritual or have spiritual practices. And I think that's the thing that's so important that I love about seeing those videos is that, and I personally thankfully to some degree, I guess this is one way to say, thankfully I've been transitioning later in life after I've been able to find a spirituality that I'm comfortable with and that I can embrace. And for me, my transness actually is a direct response from like it's a spiritual awakening.
Hmm.
It's the way that I live in a spiritual manner. But for so long, I just think it puts the idea in people's minds who are going through that process that you can invite your own understanding of spirituality or God or the universe or even just your own inner spirit. I happen to have a drag sister of mine, Linda Summers, who
Hmm.
she happened to be in the Castro when I went and got my meds, and she was able to pray over my medication before I took
Hmm.
one. And then when I went home, I had my own altar and I had my own intimate private time with myself and with whatever the fuck is out there before I took the dose myself. So I think it's just so powerful. It's almost like we need permission sometimes. Sometimes we need to see
Hmm.
other people doing it in order to think, at least for me, to think that that's something that I could do too. And
Yeah.
it seems like your transition, your drag has never really been incongruent with your spirituality, even your religion or your. Can you maybe what would you say to someone is who is challenged by existing within say, a religion, maybe even specifically yours, and being able to bring all of themselves into it?
Mm-hmm. It it makes such a difference, and for me, I'll give a little anecdote here. My drag has become a spiritual practice, and spiritual practices don't have to be rigid and defined because of what you grew up doing. If you want to take communion with goldfish and a cup of tea, that's what you have that day, and that's still holy and blessed and the communion you need it to be. So there are ways that you can enrich your own spiritual life, your own religious life, and do it in a way that honors yourself, that honors your
Hmm.
passion, that honors your soul. And so for me, my drag has become a spiritual practice, and I have a hard time doing Bible study very frequently, or doing daily daily journaling, things like that.
Hmm.
I forget so easily, and all of a sudden it's been 4 days and I haven't done it. But my drag is so consistently a spiritual practice, and I always have a candle lit when I'm getting in drag. I always have um, some sort of setup near where I'm doing my makeup that initiated that process for me.
Hmm.
And when I do my makeup for, say, services or events that I'm running, I don't think about it beforehand. And I know that sounds really chaotic, but what I do is I take some time before I start getting ready. I read through, say, the order of service, or the itinerary of the event that I'm doing. I listen to the hymns, or I read the lyrics of the hymns, usually both. Go over my sermon or my piece in the event, and then I just sort of go.
Hmm.
And whatever colors I'm drawn to, whatever um, way I want to put the lines, I just sort of follow it, and that's how I'm engaging with the work that I'm doing. Is I kind of joke, it's like, okay, what's the vibe, let's do it.
Hmm.
And it really is that simple, and it's a way for me to connect to the spirit, and where I'm being guided to do that service. And more than once I've gone to guest preach at various congregations, and I'll do just this. I've never been to this church before, I don't know. I don't know the congregation, I've never seen pictures, but I'll read through the order of service, look through the sermons, look through my sermon and the hymns, and I'll do my makeup, and I'll get to the church, and the colors that I put on my face are the colors that are in the sanctuary.
Oh,
And this
wow.
has happened more than once. And one time it was, the carpet and the banners. The most recent time it was the stained glass windows that were around. I had chosen 4 colors for my face, and it was the 4 colors in the windows.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's so powerful. And I have to take a step back every time this
Hmm.
happens, because it's so affirming that my art and the way that I'm embodying myself is so deeply connected to the universe and to the work that I'm doing, and to
Hmm.
have it be so obvious to me. um I can't even
Yeah.
put it into words sometimes. Like, it's insane.
Hmm.
But it makes such a powerful statement, and then going into that service and leading that service feels so easy, feels
Yeah.
so effortless, and what I'm meant to be doing in that moment, because how could it not be what I'm meant to do?
Right, right. In so many of these conversations, I hear people, this is often when people are having some sort of like uh, fracture, if you will, from their religion or origin or whatever, that there's this like, it seems like as maybe trans or drag folks, it seems like we get to, once we realize we kind of have this, I feel like we have this individual relationship with like God or spirituality, but the community can sometimes be the
Hmm.
challenge, like the place in which I can be in community with people like this is a little bit more challenging. Can you talk a little bit about how community has been for you?
Yeah, so community is everything to me, both as a raging extrovert and somebody who likes to take care of people. Having community around me, friendships, acquaintanceships, friends, colleagues, all of this is so important to me. And I find myself in many different communities of people. And I always make the joke, right? In the church or the religious world, you have to come out as queer, and in the queer world, you have to come out as religious,
Yep.
right? It's this sort of there's so much history, and it's so valid, but it's quite funny for somebody who's very passionately
Mhm.
involved in both. And my religious communities, I'm very blessed to say that I've had pretty much nothing but positive experiences. People take time to learn, of course, and that's a part of life. But a lot of my church communities have been very open to learning, to being told they're wrong, to being corrected, to engaging with new vocabulary and doing that stuff, and that has meant the world to me. I moved to Toronto away from my family. My family's all in Vancouver. And so when I moved to Toronto, I moved out here by myself. And that's when I started to think about my transition and kind of come to terms with this within the last 5 years. And if my church wasn't supportive, I don't know what I would have done, because, they held my hand through the many, many, many name changes I went through. And it threw off a lot of the people, but they went with it, and I don't know what I would have done without that. And on the flip side, the queer community in Toronto is incredible. There's so many people who help each other, who look out for each other, who raised funds for each other during the pandemic, who give each other jobs, who make sure that we're taken care of. It makes such a difference, and it's so important to have that and to engage in your communities as your full self. Because if you are your full self around the people that are around you, they know you, right. They love you, they care for you, they want to take care of you, and they'll know how if you let them. Yeah,
and you won't find yourself like all of a sudden in a group with a bunch of people that don't get you, don't see you, and you're like, I don't even know why I'm here. Yeah, it's so easy to get into that space of like being somebody we're not, just so that we can be somewhere. It sounded like there's been like a lot of positive and a lot of really great things that drag and even your spirituality has brought into your life. What would you say has been one of the more difficult or challenging parts of your spiritual drag experience?
I think it's the reputation that drag has with some communities of folks, within religious communities, within spiritual communities, that drag is this nightlife, sex crazy, drunk, drug infested thing. That's where that happens. That's where that art form is from. And that's the reputation that it has with a lot of people. And so I've run into that.
Right. And that's all well and good. Right.
And there are people that do that, and it's amazing and fun, and that's their art, and that's their community, and that's where they find themselves, and that's beautiful. Not every drag artist is there.
Right.
And sure, do I engage, do I do drag in a sexy way sometimes? Yeah. But that's not what it's about, right? Like, my drag is about my connection to myself, my connection to the universe, my connection to whatever I'm doing in that moment, right? And so I've gotten a lot of pushback from people about, like, well, if you're in the bars all the time, how can you be a minister, right? If you're going out and befriending all these sex workers and drag artists, how can you do?
Right. I've
gotten some of that.
Yeah, right. How can you be a minister and not be in those places, right?
And that's exactly how I feel. People are people, and people need people. And I found myself, and I found community in the queer community, around drag artists, around sex workers, around people who are fighting for rights and going to protests and on the front lines of things. Those people are deserving of company and love and care and space, whether or not that's been traditionally allowed in a sanctuary, right?
Yes.
I've had so many spiritual experiences on the dance floors of bars, right? Or at a rave, or, at various events, because of, the community, because of what's going on. The first public miracle, well, not even public, one of the first miracles Jesus performed, right, was changing water into wine at a wedding, so they all could dance and drink. There's something to say about that. In, again, community and having fun in engaging with one another in different ways.
What would you say? I mean, I know, like, for me too, like, holding spirituality and drag at the same time, especially online or out in public, can really invite a lot of difficult reactions. What kind of one, like, either like, how do you cope with that? And or how would you like, what advice would you give, say, a person who is newly kind of in a space where they're holding their drag and spirituality at the same time
Mhm.
in public?
It's definitely not always easy, right? And if you do face this and you're like, damn, this is really hard. Yeah, it is. And that's a part of it. Um, Fortunately or unfortunately for us, you develop a skin against a lot of that. And the way that you do that again is by just embodying yourself, right? If you know that you are being your best self, then nothing that anybody else can say can change that. I hope that makes some sense. Like if
Hmm.
there are comments that are coming at you, or if there are, critiques or these kinds of things that are not welcome, take them with a
Right.
grain of salt. Depending on your level of safety, what kind of relationship you want with this person afterwards. If it's a congregant, if it's a stranger on the street, you're going to have different reactions.
Hmm.
But it's about remembering that you are doing your art, your expression, your spiritual practice for you,
Right.
for your soul, for your energy. It's filling your cup. If other people like it, great. you know, they're lucky enough to be in the presence of you loving and engaging with your full self.
Mm. Yeah, very well said. And I think another part of that too, would just like, because I feel like it's something that we all, I hear it over and over and over, and I see it over and over and over. That one, that you're not in isolation if you are having that experience with like kind of being under attack. And I think just reaching out to other spiritual drag artists, I know
Hmm.
that's been a really great way for me. I know Flamey Grant has gotten in my comments before and
Hmm.
said a few things, like maybe get some new material. Maybe that was something she said. But yeah, there is a community of folks
Hmm.
who are out there um, that are doing drag and doing spiritual shit at the same time, for sure.
It has been so eye-opening to engage with you and the others in this team. I remember it was early last year, and I read an article online somewhere about Miss Pentecost, who I believe
Hmm.
is involved in our event as well.
Yes.
And that was the first I'd ever seen. I had never seen anybody else kind of bringing drag or bringing this into a religious or spiritual sphere. And I read this article and my jaw dropped. And immediately I went on every social media platform and tried to find her everywhere. And like friend requested, followed, like started commenting on things. And I was like, oh my God, be my friend, please.
Hmm.
And so I got Penny to come and speak at a worship I was running last summer for an organization that I work with, and just sort of have been connecting with more of you ever since, and becoming a part of
Hmm.
this team. It's blown my mind that this is something that people are doing, that's happening all across where we are,
Right, right.
and it's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of us get started in it and we're like, we're all alone, or we're mavericks or whatever. And there are like there are us like all over the place.
Hmm.
And you talked a little bit about being part of a team, and I know that's about the Dragon Spirituality Summit. Do you want to talk a little bit about like, I guess, like your decision to get involved with that and maybe your hopes for, outcomes with the summit?
Yeah. I wanted to be involved for a lot of reasons. I'm learning and in the process of developing skills to do interfaith leadership, and I think this is an opportunity to challenge myself, to learn, to engage with the various spiritual and religious practices that maybe are unfamiliar to me, with artists who are engaging with it in ways that maybe I kind of understand because of our art. Um, so that was one reason. And again, another reason is community, right? Like finding people
Mhm.
who are passionate about similar things to me, who have a connection to spirituality, to religion, who are engaging in these spheres of their life. It's a pretty cool crossroads of people. And I just wanted to meet people and learn and sing and dance and just relish in it all. uh,
Mhm.
so a hope for me is to do just that, to learn, to bring things home with me that are going to add to my spiritual life, that are going to add to my religious life, that I can I was talking to a couple of my professors about the summit today and saying I was going to miss a class or whatever during that week, and they said it's okay so long as I report back and talk to them all about the conference. So
Mhm.
um, it's going to be a really powerful weekend, I think, and I'm so excited to be around people and to see the art and hear the stories and learn.
Yeah, well, I am so glad that you're a part of it and you're such a powerhouse and such a like significant like this is our first year. When I first like posted on Facebook like I think we should do this, like I didn't really know what it would be, but then I got like a ton of responses like, yes, let's do it,
Mm-hmm.
let's do it, let's do it. And so you were one of those people and you've been a constant person that's really because it's been challenging at times. And I've really appreciated regular communication with you and what you've been able to bring to the
Mm-hmm.
group for sure. So we have about 10 minutes left of the conversation. So folks who are listening, if you'd like to ask a question of King Jules, now is a really great time to do it if you're going to do it. Also, I'm going to run across the screen there. Ways that you can reach King Jules is scrolling across the screen if you're watching, or it's in the description if you're listening. Um, I Is there anything that you would like to speak to or speak more on that maybe we haven't spoken about yet? That was almost the correct sentence. I'm sorry. You knew what I meant.
The words were there. They fit together in my brain somehow. um, I don't know. I have so much fun doing my art, and my art changes all the time. I mean, there's a couple of the angles on my face today are different than I've ever done them before. I'm always kind
Mm,
of playing with it and see how it goes. And I really hope people know and learn that their spirituality is theirs, right? And the way that they engage with their spirituality is their own. And if you want to paint your face and call it a spiritual practice because it is for you, then do
mhm,
that. If you want to, I know people that, walk themselves through mindfulness practices as they're cooking, right? And cooking meals is their spiritual practice. There are so many different ways that we can engage um, and being wholly and authentically yourself and embodying your full self is such a peaceful and
mm.
just cup filling way to live. Um, yeah, and since I started bringing my drag into my religious and spiritual spheres, it has just blossomed and opened up much more than I ever thought was possible.
Mhm. I'm curious. First I was like, what is your dream for? But what I'd like to say is like, what would you like to put out in the universe and maybe manifest that like you would like to see King Jules do in the future? It looks like we do have a question too. Let's go to the question first, and I'll ask you that again. Um, a Facebook user says, "Hi there. I'm so glad to be here watching you tonight. I need some prayers at the moment. I have a very long backstory to tell you, but basically I'm a trans, bi, gender transvestite who wants to become a drag queen. I lost my job last month and I feel really down about myself. Can you please pray that I can find a way forward? My drag name is Vicky Shock."
Thank you for being here with us, Vicky. So
And
lovely too.
we'll definitely say a prayer for you. Thank you for sharing your testimony and your experience with us here this evening. And then there's another question here. Levi asks, what have your experiences been like performing drag as a spiritual practice in queer spaces? Like was mentioned, so many of us have trauma from spiritual experience. How do you approach that? Great question.
Mm, that's a really good question. So the way that I haven't performed in a bar or in a queer space in quite some time. Throughout the pandemic, I stayed home. I was living with somebody who was immunocompromised, and I didn't have the time or space or materials to do online, so I just engaged with it in different ways. When I have performed in queer spaces, the performance itself isn't the spiritual practice, but the spiritual practice for me is getting into drag and
Mhm,
embodying myself. That's the spiritual practice for me. And so when I've performed in queer spaces, I do a lot of lip syncs. I sing as well, so I do that sometimes. I haven't taken to a stage in a queer space and offered prayer or offered that kind of thing just yet. I think I'm going through some schooling. I'm in seminary right now, so I'm going through some schooling about spiritual care and counseling, and I want to have some of those tools, I think, before I start doing these spiritual things or religious related things in queer spaces, just because I don't want to, possibly bring up trauma or trigger people or hurt people and not have the tools to help. Because I think that's really irresponsible and really harmful to people potentially. So I've done a lot of lip syncing and various other forms of performance in queer space, but in that context, the spiritual practice for me is getting into drag.
Yeah, yeah. And I think oftentimes, I mean, I think it is something we have to be really careful for. I know for so long as a queer person, I was a person who had spiritual trauma, and like I was very protective of my community too, like from
Mm-hmm.
like from like spiritual people or religion as well. So I think one of the things that I would add to it is just like, I think attraction, not promotion, in the sense that I think I think when we live our lives in a certain way and we become seen in a certain way, I think people will come to us
Mm-hmm.
when they're ready. So I think just being able to be open about the fact that you are a spiritual person and that you do drag, I think can be one way to do it. And then it kind of invites people to then come to you and talk to you about how that works for them. Because
Mm-hmm.
it can be really, I think it's a very sensitive um topic to just kind of like bring up.
Absolutely. And I always put things out online or when I'm in person with people. I work in the church. It's very obvious and very publicly what I do. And I always let people know, like, if there is ever a moment you want me to light a candle for you, you want me to add your name to a prayer list, you want me to do this, please let me know. I will never do anything like that without anybody's permission.
Hmm.
I'm not about that.
I
But I
love
always
that.
make it known that that's a possibility, that I'm willing to do that, right? And I'm willing to engage with that. And once I'm ordained and fully accredited, bet I'm going to be doing so many drag weddings and drag baptisms. It's going to be so much
Yeah.
fun. Um, and ordained ministry and congregational ministry is the pipe dream, is the long term goal. And bringing my drag to that space and embodying that, and it's really symbolic and really powerful. Um, and I'm just I love it so much.
Well, and it sounds like you kind of in that answer also answered my question about like if you could manifest King Jules at some location doing something, what would that
Mhm.
be?
Yeah, I'm very, very passionate about community leadership and congregational leadership, and whether that looks like a traveling ministry that I bring to different communities at different times. I always joke I'll be the traveling circus. um,
Mhm.
or I nestle with a community who wants to learn and grow and engage with art in cool ways. Um, the possibilities are endless, and I know the universe will take me where I'm meant to be. Um, I've been saying this for a few years, but I think in the future I would also really love to be moderator of the United Church, which is a position in the church of leadership in the national church broadly. Um, I think it would be quite the experience, and I want to be able to do that and bring my gifts and my skills to that, and in that bringing everything that I've learned from everybody around me
Right,
to that
right.
space as well.
Well, awesome. I can't wait for that to happen for you and for your community. I want to say thank you so much for joining me this evening. And thanks everyone who joined us in this conversation. It was a really, really great conversation. It seemed like we covered a lot of bases, and I'm excited to meet you in the flesh in real life.
Me
um,
too.
in just like less than a month away at the Dragon Spirituality Summit. And thanks again for just being involved and the work that you do. I wanted to on our way out, one, obviously check out dragonspirituality.com. We'd love to have you at the summit. If you can be there in real life, hashtag in person, whatever, that's great. But we also will be live streaming a lot of the panels and the keynotes. So there
Mhm.
is ways to engage with us virtually if that is what all that you're able to do. We do want to try to increase accessibility as much as possible. On the way out too, I normally play like a little like commercial kind of thing for the next thing. And Anyway, next week it's Justin Case, who is a drag king out of LA. So join us next week at the same time, the same place. And what I'd like to do is actually just like give ourselves a moment of quiet time. And I would like to put back up Vicky Shock's kind of prayer request and just give everyone a moment to, in their own way, to just spend some time and some energy, whether that's prayer, lighting candles, meditation, whatever it is, writing a note, however way that is, to just take some time and, think of Vicky Shock this evening. And we'll do that for like the next 30 minutes or so. So if you're watching live, just take this moment of silence. If you're listening to us on the podcast later, just do the same as well. Thanks so much, and we'll do a moment of silence. All right, and just for the sake that we're like live, please do take more time and energy. I really wish you the best on your journey, Vicky, as well as King Jules and everyone who is coming across this weekend. Levi is asking for Vicky's Venmo, which I don't have, but Vicky, feel free to place that in the comments if you're able, if you have a Venmo or Cash App, or if there's a way that folks could send you a gift. It sounds like they would like to. So uh, we're gonna leave the show right now because we're past our 45 minutes, and I usually like to try to stay around that time. But for folks who are listening to this afterwards, you're going to be able to find in the comments once it's placed there how you can reach out to Vicky as well. So thanks everyone again for joining us, and have a really great evening. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.